Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. This afternoon we have two budget analyses to look at: the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Port Administration, and the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Aviation Administration. Just for everybody's benefit, I know the people in this room know this, but a lot of us have bill hearings and other committees overlapping with this, so people will be in and out. Don't take it personally. Actually, there's a lot of interest in the port and the airport. It's just that folks are double and triple booked. So with that, we will start with the Maryland Port Administration and our budget analyst, Steve McCulloch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, you should have a document in front of you entitled Maryland Port Administration. Beginning on page 1, the operating budget for the port increases by $2 million over the current year. That's just under 4%. Looking at the PAGO capital summary on page 2, $109 million or 60% increase over the current year working. We'll be discussing why those big swings occur. Starting with the managing for results, the first exhibit is on page 1, and it shows foreign cargo tonnage at the port and shows that it's turning to pre-pandemic levels, especially seen compared to 2020, both on the amount of cargo and the value handled. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the port's market share for the Mid-Atlantic and shows that in 2022 market share just remained the same as in the current year, or the previous year, excuse me, at 17%. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows selected cargo commodities handled at the port. Performance was mixed. Both forest products and roll-on or roll-off, which you'll see abbreviated as RO-RO, were both up in 2022 compared to the previous year, while auto tonnage and number of containers were down in 2022 relative to the previous year. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows cruise ship operation numbers, with the bars representing the number of passengers served and the line showing the number of home port cruises handled. Now, there was an 18-month no sail order due to the pandemic, so you see in 2021 there were no cruises out of Baltimore or anywhere in the United States. 2022, therefore, showing a rebound, but we are still not back. 2022 was not back to even the 2020 level, which had a partial effect for the pandemic and shutdown. The final MFR exhibit is Secret truck turn times. This measures the time between when a truck enters the port facility to the time it leaves. Reducing that amount of time is a measure of efficiency. It increases throughput for the port, and it shows that for 2022, the port is just meeting that 60-minute goal that it has set for itself. The overview of agency spending, Exhibit 6 on page 10, provides a breakout of the allowance by category. You can see that personnel and contracted security services account for over 60% of their spending, with smaller amounts for other contractual services and the other categories listed there. The proposed budget change, Exhibit 7, is shown on page 11. As I indicated at the beginning, the budget increases by just under $2 million, or 3.9% over the current year working. Personnel expenses account for nearly a third of this, $661,000 increase, that largely due to employee and retiree health costs and the annualization of the November 2022 general salary increase. The major part of the remaining increase is located in the water and sewer charges that the port budgeted at the actual level of expenditures in fiscal 2022. On page 12, Exhibit 8 shows a calculation of net income or loss. This is an exercise we do carry out, but I always like to point out that the revenues that the port, the airport, and MTA, the three kind of operating revenue generating modes, bring in, do not actually stay with each of those individual transportation business units or TBUs. It's all deposited into the trust fund, which then covers the operating and capital costs. But it is interesting and insightful as a measure of how the the revenue operations, are comparing to the expenses. And as you can see from this exhibit on page 12, there was a net income for the operating side of things. There's, I don't believe, ever a net income when you layer in the capital spending. But in 2023 and 2024, there's actually an operating loss comparing operating revenues to the operating budget, although 2024 is projected to be much greater. Turning to page 13, the personnel exhibit, there are no increases in regular operating budget positions in the allowance. They get 1/2 of a position of full-time equivalent on the operating side. I will note in the bottom of that table that the turnover, budgeted turnover of 7% for fiscal 2024, as of January 1 of this year, the Port Administration had 37 vacant positions, which means that they could fill an additional 22 positions before the beginning of the fiscal year and still meet their budgeted turnover for 2024, even if they had no additional vacancies. That is the highest level of vacancies in among the modes for the department. The agency has indicated that many of their vacant positions, have been in the maintenance area, and they are looking at some of the apprenticeship programs that the department is developing as a whole as possible solution to lowering that number of vacancies. Also note that the salary actions the state has taken generally statewide, should help the state compete with the private sector. The pay-as-you-go or pay-go capital program discussion begins on the bottom of page 13 with the first exhibit on page 14, exhibit 9, showing the 6-year programmed capital spending by investment category. You can see that system preservation is the largest segment, although with the also large segments from 24 through 26 for expansion and efficiency, largely related to the Howard Street Tunnel project, which I'll be talking about next. Exhibit 10 on page 15 shows the 2024 capital allowance. So this is the projects that have funding in 2024, totals $405.6 million. And you can see that Howard Street Tunnel at the top is the largest capital project they have ongoing. Looking at page 16, we start the discussion of the cash flow, which just gets back to the chart changes you see on Exhibit 11 on page 16, which shows the 2023 budget is introduced, capital budget, that is the current year 2023 working, and then the 2024 allowance. And you can see it decreases in 23 and then big increase in 2024. Well, that is, as I mentioned, largely due to the Howard Street Tunnel project. Exhibit 12 on page 17 shows the cash flow changes between last year's allowance and this year's working appropriation. And you see the Howard Street Tunnel project decreases in that equation by nearly $118 million. So this was a timing issue. The project, overall project cost and the state's commitment towards that project cost has not changed. So it is just cash flow and timing of when those funds are flowing to the project. And you can see by turning to the next page, 18, which shows the cash flow between the current year working and the allowance, that the Howard Street Tunnel then again, bumps back up. So the money came out of the 23 budget, is back into the 24 budget and going forward. On page 19 is a new graph. Last year, legislation was enacted requiring the CTP to show list projects that were receiving first-year funding for either design or construction. Exhibit 14 on page 19 shows the amount of first-year funding in the Port capital program compared to ongoing funding. First-year funding comprises 5% of the Port's capital program. If you look at page 20, this shows the projects that make up that 5%. And you'll see 2 years because the requirement is they show in the budget year, which this year is 2024, or in the current year for any project that was not shown last year in the budget year. So there is an opportunity that MDOT has in constructing the working appropriation to make changes to what you saw last year. So that's why the requirement is if they add something new that you didn't see last year, they've got to report it here for the 2023 or current year budget. On page 21 shows the changes, significant changes from last year's CTP. There were 3 projects that were added to the construction program, and there was 1 project that was removed from the construction program that has been moved to the minor program. That takes us to page 22, which is a discussion of the issues. There's 1 issue, and just want to point out that issue here is not a problem. I found this to be a very interesting transaction, and I know the interest on many of the members in terms of the dredged material placement and how that's addressed. So the first issue talks about some property that the Port acquired last October, received the Board of Public Works to acquire a 136.5 acre parcel of property that's directly adjacent to the Cox Creek dredge material containment facility, where dredge material is placed if it can't go anywhere else. The Port intends to use this property to support the development of innovative reuse and of dredge material, with the goal of diverting that so that it does not have to go into a containment facility, which is done at a cost that I'll discuss momentarily. The property was part of a larger piece of property known as the Hawkins Point plant site. It was a manufacturing facility that manufactured and packaged titanium dioxide, which is a product that was used for decades in various industrial and consumer products. The manufacturing ceased in 2009, and all of the buildings on that property have since been demolished. However, that manufacturing process did result in hazardous waste that is under regulatory, currently under regulatory oversight of the Department of Environment, Maryland Department of Environment. In lieu of purchase price for this property, the Port Administration agreed to share with the seller, which is Tronx Holding, share in the environmental mitigation of that toxic material on that property. They agreed to a cost share where the state will pick up 38% and the seller will pick up the other 62%. Estimated cost for this remediation is $75 million, expected to occur over 10 years. The state's portion at 38% would be $28.5 million. That money is currently programmed in this current CTP. So the entire 28.5 is shown in the next 6 years, with the peak spending occurring in 2026 and 2027 at $18.1 million. The Port indicates that the cost for storing dredge material in containment facilities is currently about $20 to $25 per cubic yard of dredge material. When this property is fully operational, the Port expects to be able to divert a minimum of 500,000 cubic yards of dredge material annually, and so that over 20 years that would result in a savings to the state of $200 million. So much greater than the purchase price in this case. We've asked the Port to discuss with the committees the type of activities it expects the new property will support. The recommendations are on page 22, and those are both to concur with the governor's allowance for the operating and PAYGO budget.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions for the analyst? I don't see any. Thank you again. I will now turn to our Acting Secretary of Transportation, Paul Wiedefeld, as well as the Maryland Port Administration Executive Director, Bill Doyle. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Corbin and members of the committee. For the record, I am Paul Wiedefeld, Acting Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. With me today is Bill Doyle, the Executive Director of the Maryland Port Administration. As this committee is aware, Maryland's port has continued to play an integral role in maintaining our nation's supply chain over the last few years, and our port has remained efficient, positioning itself to avoid the backups and delays that other ports have seen. The port has had significant achievements over the last year, so now I will hand it over to the Executive Director, Bill Doyle, to give you a few highlights from the port and address the issues and recommendations of the DLS analysts.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon, Chairman Corman and committee members. For the record, I am William Doyle, Executive Director of the Maryland Port Administration, Port of Baltimore, Bill Doyle. I would also like to thank our DLS budget analyst, did a lot of work, Steve McCullough, for his detailed and reasonable assessment of our program. I am pleased to be here to present the state of the port this afternoon as we continue to sustain and create new jobs, build sustainable infrastructure, while ensuring the port remains a steadfast steward of the environment and leader in innovative initiatives. Port of Baltimore remains an economic engine for Maryland with over 139,000 jobs connected to port activity where Marylanders make good paying, family supporting wages 9.5% higher than the average wage in the state. Port of Baltimore remains #1 in the nation in automobiles and light trucks, and #1 in roll-on, roll-off, heavy equipment, and machinery. Port ranks 9th in the nation in overall international cargo value and 11th in overall international cargo tonnage. CSX broke ground on the long-awaited Howard Street Tunnel expansion project in November of 2021. The project consists of vertical clearance improvements in the tunnel and 21 other locations between Baltimore and Philadelphia. CSX decided to split the project into 10 smaller packages for design and construction. This allows the packages to move into construction as the design is complete and permits are secured, and allows easier processing of invoices and reimbursements since some funding is only eligible to be used on certain packages. Additionally, it allows MPA to stipulate certain policy considerations for the 5 packages that are in Maryland. For instance, MPA has required CSX to encourage all contractors to meet the state of Maryland's 29% participation goal for minority business enterprise, the MBE, firms for 6 packages located in Maryland. So far, the contractors that CSX has hired for Maryland projects have committed to meet the state's 29% MBE goal. The current construction schedule has construction going on until the end of calendar year 2025. The MPA continues to work hard to closely align its statutory mission to increase waterborne commerce through the ports in which Maryland, with stewardship of Maryland's natural resources and the health and well-being of the environment and our neighboring communities. As the largest creative wetlands in the state of Maryland, the Maryland Port Administration remains committed to holding this title as our aquatic ecosystem restoration projects move forward. To date, the MPA has restored 970 acres of wetland and wildlife habitat. The MPA has efforts underway to create, restore, or improve an additional 4,290 acres by 2072. This includes 1,343 acres at the Poplar Island by 2042, 800 acres at Hot Miller Island by 2035, 3 acres as mitigation associated with the expansion of Cox Creek Dredge Material Containment Facility by 2025, and 2,144 acres at Mid-Bay by 2072. MPA's strategic approach to environmental restoration using dredge material is the foundation for the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island project. That's the Barron and James Island. This project is located in Dorchester County near what remains James Island and Barron Island, is a crucial future placement site and is integral to the port's 20-year dredging strategy. Once Poplar Island reaches capacity in 2032, Mid-Bay will accommodate nearly 2 to 3 million cubic yards of sediment dredged annually from the Chesapeake Bay. The first phase of construction at Barron Island will soon be underway. Pre-construction, engineering, and design are underway for James Island, with construction anticipated to start in 2025. Inflow of material at James Island is anticipated to begin in 2030. When Poplar's done, James will be ready. For harbor dredge material closer to our terminals, the MPA is investing in innovative reuse of dredge material as a key component to long-term success and sustainability of the port. The MPA has provided our dredged material for daily landfill cover at Quarantine Road Landfill, for restoration of Ridgely's Cove Park in Baltimore City, and has plans to provide material for the shoreline restoration of the Middle Branch in Baltimore City. For the sixth successful year, MPA has continued to work closely with the Maryland Department of the Environment to implement air quality improvement projects under the Voluntary Air Agreement. Port of Baltimore was awarded a $1.8 million grant from the EPA for our diesel equipment reduction program. The funds will help to replace 4 yard trucks, 6 forklifts, 1 mobile welding unit, and 3 heavy-duty electric dray trucks. These will be the first electric-powered dray trucks to serve the port. The new Neo-Panamax cranes, the big white ones, at Seagirt Marine Terminal are fully electric. In addition to an ability to lift 190,000 pounds of cargo, Ports America Chesapeake, our partner, private sector partner at the port, the new cranes can avoid 985 metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year. Complementing that, the 15 new hybrid rubber-tired gantry cranes avoid 78 metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year. Port of Baltimore will continue to seek funding and partnership opportunities for port electrification and emissions reductions, including alternatives like hydrogen fuel cells, as MPA remains committed to exceeding our obligations for improved air and water quality, reduction of impacts to the Patapsco River and the Chesapeake Bay, and sound environmental management for our maritime operations. I would like to point out that 2 things we're dealing with on a daily transformation. One is the type of fuel that ocean carriers will burn. It's marine gas, oil, diesel, but because we are the largest ro-ro port in the country, what we're seeing come along is LNG as a marine fuel. Now, LNG as a marine fuel, when it burns, there is 0 particulate matter that goes into the air. We're working with Dominion Cove Point, Berkshire Hathaway, at their facility, seeing if there could be fueling opportunities, because there's only one place currently in the United States where you can refuel. That's in Jacksonville, Florida. Mid-Atlantic Hydrogen Hub. So you've got the $7 billion Infrastructure Jobs Act, and we do have people in Maryland, companies in Maryland, and groups in Maryland that are participating in that. Dominion, Constellation, Exelon BGE, and the coalition of the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health from the University of Maryland, and also the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainability Committee. Being a good community entity is very important to us. We have a great community partner in Living Classrooms Foundation. Living Classrooms work with us at Masonville Cove Environmental Campus. They develop hands-on activities and classroom curriculums for local students to learn about Masonville and the local environment. Myself, U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland, and Baltimore's Mayor Brandon Scott met in March 2022 with local high school students from the Benjamin Franklin High School and participated in water testing and shoreline cleanup projects. Masonville Cove is the cornerstone of a large-scale neighborhood revitalization project with federal, state, and local investments that aim to improve South Baltimore Title I schools, provide access to the waterfront, and encourage economic growth while protecting the environment. Its success provides a roadmap, and this is from the Interior, a roadmap for how future infrastructure funding can help support collaborative initiatives, address climate change, advance environmental justice, and ensure wildlife and habitat conservation as part and parcel to an economic development of the port. Finally, we're also very happy to be involved with the Ministers Conference Empowerment Center in Baltimore. Affiliated through Morgan State, this is a great economic development initiative led by Baltimore community, industry, and education leaders. The MPA helped secure a grant funding from the federal government with the Ministers Conference, Cradle to Career Pipeline. This program is providing youth and adult career counseling, workforce training and employment opportunities in technology and transportation careers, including vocational opportunities at the Port of Baltimore. As I conclude, I want to reiterate that 2022 was a major year for the Port of Baltimore. The state of our port is strong, and we look forward to continuing to grow our port, serving as an economic engine for Maryland. We have provided additional budget information to the committee for your reference as well as written response to DLS analysis. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you mind just briefly summarizing the response to the specific DLS question?
Yes. It's basically the Tronox property. So that is the property that we just bought. It'll be used for innovative use of dredge material. Real quick, innovative use of dredge material. Belden Brick Company, one of the applicants. Belden Brick Company put the bricks, is the brick company for Camden Yards. They've come in, we have iron-rich soil, so you don't even have to add dye to the bricks, so they'll do brick pavers. So that's what it'll be. That property will take the dredge material out of the harbor, dry it at the new facility, and then that could be used both from a commercial standpoint and also for mitigation of shoreline material that you see in the city of Baltimore or anywhere else.
Thank you. Other questions for the Port Administration? Helga Edelson?
Yes. Thank you so much for being here and for your testimony, and in addition for everything you're doing for our students in Baltimore City. That is, I know about it. It's wonderful to hear about and know about. Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask about sort of our Mid-Atlantic market share. Obviously, everything we hear is how things are booming at the port, which is fantastic. But I noticed that in the report we received, our market share has gone down a couple percentage points from 2018 to 2022. I just wanted to get a sense of what that is related to.
Yeah, the market share is strong, but the way that the port operates is we've really taken a hit on the manufacturing of microchips. The manufacturing of microchips, if you take a standard, we're doing negotiations with Jaguar Land Rover. One standard Jaguar Land Rover has over 4,000 microchips in that vehicle. So when the microchip surge happened for your home good products, they stopped developing them for the vehicles. Our market share really dropped. And when we get hit, because we're the largest in the country, it really shows up. Okay, so that's a major reason. And then also our farm machinery went up. The paper industry, forest products from Finland, they actually consolidated all Mid-Atlantic to Canada cargo into Baltimore, no longer going to Philadelphia or New Jersey. So that's here. And then containers has just been up and down as we go. We do see that with the Howard Street Tunnel, the completion. You're going to see, year one, 160,000 more containers coming into the port. So we've held well. What we didn't do is we weren't pigs during the pandemic. You heard about all of these vessels that had, days of anchorage, months of anchorage before they get into the port. What we decided to do as a port with our port manager, Ports America, is we said, look, we'll bring the ships in, and we acted as that relief valve for the rest of the country. We'll bring the ships in if we have the berth space. Otherwise, the anchorage is in Annapolis. And we don't want to have 50 ships at anchor in Annapolis. We'll take them in as we get them. So we had over 80 ships diverted to the Port of Baltimore throughout the height of the pandemic that otherwise were destined for other ports. Thank you, sir.
One more, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. Unrelated question, but one of the other pieces of information we received is the average truck turn time at Seagirt Terminal, and it seems as though we've been able to get that way down. Congratulations on hitting that goal. The question that I have really is, recognizing that there are a lot of factors at play, is it reasonable to think about setting a new goal, or is this really the peak performance, and so 60 minutes is the right goal and we keep it there?
Well, what we're doing, I think we can get it lower. But in order to get it lower, what we need to do is, what we're doing now is densifying. So your revenue producing containers and equipment or goods need to be in the port. All of the other stuff, your container repair, your chassis repair, that all is going to take place off the port. So it'll be across the street of Broning Highway. That's our plans, okay? So we'll have that. So the more space and more rows that we can put in there, and the in-out, so in Ports America Chesapeake, I can't thank them enough for what they've done. I mean, their budget for this year, they approved $100 million of their own private money just for this year. So we've got weigh in motion. So we can weigh in motion the trucks now coming in so they don't have to stop. So that's going to help. But what happens here is that while we're doing construction, things do gum up at Seagirt Marine Terminal. You'll see every once in a while there'll be a spike, and we just got to work with the trucker community more. But I think, you know, eventually when all's said and done, we could hopefully get it to 45 minutes, which is good.
Great. Thank you so much.
Vice Chair Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was an audit report in 2022 that pointed out there was insufficient documentation for services billed by the Maryland Environmental Services. And the agency response to that was that there was, why don't you actually tell me what the agency response was to it?
Do I have that document?
So I can tell you what you
Yeah.
said, if that'll jog
Yeah,
your
'cause
memory here. But
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just was trying to understand the agency response, which said that there was staffing interruptions with COVID and working from home, and somehow through that process you were unable to do subcontractor audit processes.
Yeah, I mean,
in order to document that, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $218 million.
Yeah. I can get more information for you on that, but that was the genesis of it. It was sloppy work. You know, when that popped up in the auditor's report, you know, we had to put in mechanisms so that we would be able to track that more. There wasn't a loss of money.
Of course.
Okay. But there was sloppy work.
But you might not know if there was a loss of money if you're not documenting it properly.
Correct.
And you feel as though those processes are now in place and are solid?
I do. And my harbor development team is, you know, they're second to none. I mean, I really appreciate their hard work, and, you know, not just me as the boss, but they took that very seriously. They were hurt, you know, and you know, they do a good job over there, and, you know, they don't ever want to cast a bad light on them, especially because they do such professional work.
And so we won't see it again in a future audit?
I hope not, and I will strive. No,
Thank
I don't
you.
want you to see it again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Lewis.
Thank you. And one of my questions were taken by the vice chair. I want to make this quick. It's good to see you guys again. I always love your energy. My question is on the personnel side. So obviously, you know, you do have some vacancies. I was just wondering, like, where within the port, like, is it a specific role that's vacant? You know, we get the numbers of saying you have these numbers vacant as a percentage, but we don't necessarily know, like, what is the job? Is that uniquely vacant?
Yeah. It is engineering and operations, and it's strictly related to pay. It's salary. So the overwhelming majority of our empty pins are related to that. Now, what I can tell you is this. We went months, like several months, without getting one resume because the private sector is just paying too much. We're now starting to see more resumes come in for these types of jobs. But that has been the stoppage there.
So the resumes that you're starting to see now, is it, I'm assuming we did a pay increase in November, so, you know, we're still not meeting the private sector, obviously, right? So are they looking for other things? Is it flexibility? Is it work share? Like, what is it that we think will attract them to the port as opposed to some of the private sector folks?
I think it'll be economy driven. You know, if the private sector jobs aren't there, people will run to, you know, government employment. It's a big spread though, and it's on the money. I mean, you can't, a kid coming in, and I've talked to him, I've been in their shoes, I'm an engineer myself. They don't want to hear about pension at 22 years old. They don't want to hear about, you know, all the stuff that you care about when you're 40. You know, they don't care about right now. So it's difficult to get them in. Now, we do offer, you know, a flexible schedule. You know, we do have that. You know, we have, you know, parking garage spaces, you know, right across from the World Trade Center. It is very difficult to get them through the door.
Got it. So essentially, I guess
Salary.
what I'm also hearing is pending a recession and people not hiring otherwise, they're coming our way.
Yeah. Now, we've got, on the other disciplines, we are hiring, but that's the one that, it's a killer. Todd?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just add to that, just having left the consulting business and on the other side of that equation, it is, obviously, some of it is salary, but right now there is a lack of supply, to be frank, particularly for some of the junior, for the level of work, all the federal dollars that are coming through. So it's very difficult to just find people in general. And then obviously then the other obstacle that we face, as a state agency.
Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being here. It's always a good presentation. I'm always intrigued about the port because it's my neighbor. But I'm intrigued and interested in hearing about the electric cranes. How are they working? Are they maintaining?
They're fabulous. I mean, they're really working well. The training that goes on, the ILA workforce is just phenomenal. International Longshoremen's Association. I mean, these guys they're crackerjacks at operating those cranes, and they are, the largest vessels that could fit through the Panama Canal come to our port due to those cranes.
Let me ask you this, if I may. How do we charge them up? I mean, how do you recharge the battery? I mean,
there's a bus bar. You know what I mean? They're plugged into the grid.
Okay.
I mean, that's the answer. Okay. That's how it works. Yeah, I mean, it's super, on a ship, 460 volts is considered high voltage. Not even the ballpark for these ones. Yeah.
When you drive past and you see, and you tell people they're electric, they go, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
no
really
diesel,
easy.
No fumes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, don't go far.
Thank you very much.
We will now turn to the analysis for the Maryland Aviation Administration and our budget analyst, Carrie Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Carrie Cook with the Department of Legislative Services, doing the analysis for the Maryland Aviation Administration. So just on a very high level here, their FY24 operating budget increased $15.7 million, or 7.4%, to $227.6 million. And on the capital side, their PAYGO budget increases $6.5 million, or 4.4%, to $155.3 million. And we will be going through 2 issues and 2 recommended actions in the analysis. So MAA is responsible for aviation activity throughout the state. Mainly that involves the operations and maintenance of Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport, BWI, as well as Martin State Airport, which is a smaller airport that functions as a relief airport. They also do air support for the Maryland Air National Guard and with the state police. The agency also administers regional aviation grants for smaller county airports throughout the state. So the first graph here is Exhibit 1 on page 5, and you can see here that this is the passengers by year at BWI. So you can see the 2022 estimate here illustrates a strong recovery from the pandemic. The 2022 figure is an estimate, but it will be fairly close to the actual number. So they had 23.8 million in that calendar 2022 estimate, and the agency projects that they will be nearly back at 2019 levels in calendar 2023. They're projecting about 26.6 million passengers. The next graph is on page 6, and this illustrates the market share. So this is showing the share of passengers between the 3 airports in the region. So you can see BWI is the blue on the bottom here. And you can also notice that historically the market share has been quite close between the 3 airports in the region. BWI did achieve the highest market share in 2020, and it has since decreased by a few percentage points. And now DCA or Reagan does have the highest market share in the 2022 estimate. So the agency should comment on current and planned efforts to keep BWI competitive in the regional market and continue to attract more passengers. Another measure that we have is on page 7. This is cost per enplaned passenger. So this is an industry ratio that's really showing you how efficient the airport is being, the cost that they have for terminal and airfield facility maintenance, and divided by the amount of passengers, so per enplaned person. So you can see here that BWI, which is the blue line, actually avoided a very significant spike in this ratio during the pandemic that IAD and DCA had. And you can also see that from fiscal 21 to 22, they are actually starting to bring it back down towards their 2019 levels. So you can see they're doing really strong in this ratio compared to the other two regional airports. In terms of their fiscal 22 closeout, they did have higher than expected operations for winter ice operations, but that is reimbursed by the airlines, so MAA is not ultimately responsible for it. And they also received $4 million from the ARPA Airport Improvement Program from the federal government. Moving now towards the proposed fiscal 2024 budget, you can see the pie chart on page 8 shows that the vast majority of their budget is planned for BWI operations. There is a small slice for Martin State operations, and then another small amount for those regional aviation grants that I mentioned earlier. On page 9, you can see the proposed budget and the change from the previous budget. A large portion of that is personnel expenses, as you're seeing in every agency, associated with increased insurance expenses, as well as the cost of living adjustment. They do also have an increase in airport security costs. This is due to the airport security being provided by Maryland Transportation Authority, MDTA Police, and the reimbursement agreement. And MDTA Police did have some increased negotiated personnel and benefits, so that accounts for that. And then some increased utility costs just associated with inflation and increased costs generally as well. And then moving on to page 11, which is the special fund revenues and expenditures. So as Steve mentioned, MAA does take money out of the Transportation Trust Fund as well as depositing their revenues into it. So this is not necessarily the books for MAA specifically, but it is just interesting to look at how they're doing in terms of their revenues and expenditures. So you can see that they project their revenue to increase by about $14.5 million from 2023 to 2024. And it's not very evident on this chart, but I did also want to point out that they are doing very well in terms of their concessions revenue. That 111,000 figure in 2022 was over double the projection, and that is due to an increase in parking fees and where people are parking, and that provides revenue for the airport as well. Moving on to personnel on page 12, there was no change in the regular full-time positions. The agency did receive 1.5 positions for full-time contractuals, and these were positions that were shifted amongst the MDOT modes just to provide for current needs. And moving on to their capital program on page 13, this illustrates, Exhibit 7, this illustrates the 6-year plan for their PAYGO capital allowance. The total plan is $1.18 billion, which is an increase of $280 million from the previous program last year. And that's due to several major projects, which we'll discuss later, appearing for the first time. The next chart on page 14 is the PAYGO allowance by fund. So those blue bars there are the special funds from the Transportation Trust Fund, federal funds in red, and green is the other. So the reason that there are so many other funds from 2023 to 2026 is due to airport revenue bonds that were issued to help cover the costs of some of their major projects that are ongoing right now. I also just wanted to briefly mention the IIJA. This is the current federal authorization for transportation projects in the states, so the formula funding. In addition, it provides discretionary competitive funding. So the agency has applied to various competitive funding opportunities through the IIJA. They have programmed about $182 million in competitive funding over the 6-year period in their capital allowance, and that full list is in the appendix. On page 15 is the programs that are receiving capital funding in FY 2024. And you can see that the majority of these are infrastructure and other repairs and improvements at BWI. Page 16 shows the cash flow. So this illustrates the difference between the 2023 budget as approved by the legislature versus the current cash flow that's happening right now in fiscal 2023 and the 2024 allowance budget. So you can see an increase in the yellow, the special funds from the legislative to the working. That's due to a few projects that were slightly delayed, so they didn't spend quite as much in fiscal 2022 as they thought they were, so they just put the money back in for fiscal 2023 to keep those projects on track. The increase in other funds, which is the red, is a passenger facility charge application that's currently pending with the Federal Aviation Administration. And on page 17, also as Steve mentioned, the new requirement for the agency to publish first-year funding. So the pie chart shows that 22% of the funding in fiscal 2024 is first-year funding, either in design or construction. And the list on the following page, page 18, is a list of those projects that are receiving first-year funding, either in fiscal 2023, a change from the previous program, or this upcoming budget year, fiscal 2024. We also have on page 19 the major changes from the previous CTP. As I mentioned, there are several new projects that are appearing in the program for the first time. And as before, many of these are improvements and renovations to parts of BWI, and there's a few projects that have to do with Martin State Airport as well. And then moving on to the issues for the agency on page 20, this describes the BWI concessions contract. So the way that the concessions works is that the manages all the concessions throughout the airport, all of the retail and the food stores that passengers can visit. This developer leases the space from the agency and then subleases the space to vendors. So the current holder of this contract is a company called Fraport. They have had the contract since 2004. They manage over 160,000 square feet in terms of those food and retail locations throughout the terminal. And it also includes 149 different individual locations. The contract originally expired a few years ago. It has been extended several times. It's currently set to expire in March. On May 31st, the agency released an RFP for the new contract, and in the original schedule, they were supposed to recommend the award for November 1st. Since the release of that original contract, there have been two addendums. In July, there was a change to the required company experience, meaning that they were now allowing a combination of people instead of one person to demonstrate the experience requirement. That addendum also increased the annual rental rate and the amount of leased space and made a clarification on the minority business requirements. A second addendum in August made a slight change to the standards for the audits that in the required documentation. So the current vendor, Fraport, did file a lawsuit regarding this procurement in Anne Arundel County. The parties have agreed to a stay until February 15th and further agreed that a new contract would not be recommended until 60 days after that date. So that would put them past the current expiration of the contract, which is in March. So the agency should comment on its plans for the period between the conclusion of the current contract and the agreed upon date for the earliest time that they can award the new contract. They should also discuss how the lawsuit will impact services for BWI, if it will, and any fiscal impacts that may result from the litigation, the delay in awarding the new contract, or a potential emergency extension of the new contract to cover that gap in time. And the last issue here is more follow-up in terms of the passengers and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can see on page 22, this is just a more detailed look at the passenger recovery. So you can see this is the departing only passengers per month at BWI. So the 2019 level is that blue at the top, and then the yellow is 2022. So you can see that they are getting quite close to 2019 levels, especially through the fall months. And it was an average of just 16% below 2019 on a month-to-month basis for calendar year 2022. And finally, I just wanted to touch on the disruption that probably several people in this room experienced from Southwest Airlines over the holidays. So over the winter holidays, Southwest Airlines experienced a major disruption in service. There was a winter storm that went through the country. Many airlines experienced a disruption in service and canceled flights, but Southwest in particular had a sort of cascading scheduling crisis where they were not able to recover as other airlines were. Nationwide, there were over 16,000 flights canceled, 2 million passengers impacted. And the reason that this is important is that Southwest serves more passengers at BWI than all other airlines combined. The agency estimates that they carried about 69% of all passengers at the airport in calendar 2022. The agency estimated that the airline canceled 645 or 31% of flights during this period from December 24th to January 2nd, and many more passengers didn't have canceled flights but still had significant delays. Now, there's only so much the agency can do when something like this happens, but the agency did prioritize customer service during this time. They had more staff in the terminal. They distributed water to folks, coupons for local hotels, and they really prioritized responding to customers' issues via email, phone, and in person. The agency notes that Southwest is currently operating normally and addressing the issues that led to the event to prevent further problems. And we just ask that the agency comment on its continued efforts to maintain high-level service at the airport and any lessons learned in supporting passengers and customers during this severe disruption. And finally, the recommended actions on page 23 is to concur with the governor's allowance for both the operating and the PAYGO capital side. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the analyst? Great, thank you again. We will now turn to the Acting Secretary, Paul Wiedefeld, as well as the Airport Executive Director, Mr. Ricky Smith. Mr. Secretary, please.
Good afternoon again, Chairman Corbin, members of the committee. Again, for the record, it is Paul Wiedefeld, Acting Secretary for the Department of Transportation, and with me is Ricky Smith, the Executive Director of the MAA. It's a pleasure to be before you for the airport, having managed the airport for 10 years. That's a little part of my heart in it. BWI Marshall remains a vibrant airport in the Washington-Baltimore region and is an economic engine for the state, as you well know. And our success relies on the partnerships we've created with Southwest Airlines, but all airlines at the airport. Rick and his team have continued to advance major capital projects to support this growth at BWI Marshall. The new Southwest Aircraft Maintenance Base project will be Southwest's first East Coast maintenance base and demonstrates a long-term commitment by Southwest to this airport and to the region. That is a very big deal. In addition, the construction of the Concourse AB Connector baggage handling system project is well underway, and again, it supports the growth of Southwest Airlines at the airport. In closing, I did want to mention that I can say from personal experience that the safety and security of employees and the customers is always the first priority of the department and MAA at BWI Marshall. And I thank the entire team for continuing to do that. And I think during this episode that we had reflects that as well. They really jumped in very quickly and dealt with those issues as best they could, and as well as when the NOTAM issue arose 2 weeks later. So now with that, Executive Director Ricky Smith will provide some additional details, and we'll answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Paul. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present MAA's 2024 budget request. My name is Ricky Smith, for the record, Executive Director of the Maryland Aviation Administration. I have with me Paul Shank, who is the Chief Engineer for the Maryland Aviation Administration, just in case there's some related questions. I, too, want to thank Carrie Cook for her excellent analysis of the Maryland Aviation Administration. It's amazing how you can pick up an agency and a complex topic in such short fashion and become a master of it. So thank you very much for your analysis. 2022 was a rebound year as airlines and passenger traffic continue to recover from a global pandemic. BWI is about 85% to full recovery, as noted earlier, from pre-COVID traffic levels. At certain peak travel periods over the past year, passenger traffic has actually approached or surpassed levels not seen since the pandemic. And so we expect by the end of this calendar year to be back to 2020, to about 27 million annual passengers, which is where we were in 2019. 3 new airlines launched new service over the past year, and several other carriers resumed domestic or international routes that were temporarily suspended during the pandemic. And just last month, Copa Airlines announced that it will begin service from BWI Marshall to Panama City with easy and efficient connections to destinations across Latin America. This is an important international additional destination as it signals BWI Marshall's expanding reach into the global aviation marketplace. Spirit and Frontier Airlines are also growing, with Frontier requesting additional gates at the airport. These ultra-low fare carriers provide competition and stimulate air travel demand in the region. We have several major capital projects underway that will add new services and amenities for our customers while also providing important facilities for our airline partners. Our $55 million restroom improvement program is expanding and enhancing 6 sets of restrooms throughout the airport terminal. The improved facilities will help ensure an excellent passenger experience at the airport. Site development continues on time and on budget for the creation of a major maintenance hangar for Southwest Airlines, as Paul noted. As the first Southwest maintenance facility in the Northeast U.S., the hangar will accommodate 3 Boeing 737 aircraft along with exterior apron space for 8 more 737 aircraft. We've handed over part of the site to Southwest so that they can begin constructing the facility. We're also nearing completion of a new taxiway to the maintenance hangar site, Taxiway F, which was 100% federally funded. And the major multi-year Concourse A, B, and baggage handling system program will transform the passenger experience and provide additional capacity for Southwest Airlines to grow. This is the largest single capital project in the airport's history. It will introduce a new state-of-the-art baggage handling system, as well as new food and retail options, restrooms, and a direct connection between Concourses A and B. Martin State Airport, too, has recovered quite well. As a matter of fact, Martin remained strong throughout the pandemic. As you know, it's our general aviation and corporate aviation airport. Over the last several years, Martin has been a commercial success and a profitable enterprise. Unfortunately, the aviation industry ended 2022 on a sour note with the well-publicized Southwest Airlines meltdown. We're confident that those passengers who had a terrible holiday travel experience will be compensated by Southwest and return to the skies to fly again. I met with Bob Jordan, the CEO of Southwest Airlines, yesterday morning as he do what he's calling his apology tour, and he reiterated the airline's commitment to making sure that they make passengers whole. In fact, as part of its compensation to disrupted travelers, Southwest provides 25,000 rapid rewards points, frequent flyer points. Those points can add up to as many as 2 free round-trip flights. The USDOT is examining the airline's response to the crisis. We're certain that the airline will make the changes needed to ensure a better passenger experience. Going forward, we believe we are well positioned for further recovery and growth. Our 2 largest airline partners, Southwest and Spirit, have strong balance sheets, and there is an industry consensus that leisure travel will recover faster than business travel. BWI Marshall is a heavy leisure travel airport. Low-fare carriers like Southwest and Spirit will lead our road to recovery. Our airport parking business is back to surpassing pre-pandemic levels in terms of revenue generation, and later this year we will accept 8 new electric buses to support our parking operations and sustainability efforts. So MAA is climbing out of this pandemic and looking ahead. The analysts did identify 3 issues which we have responded to in writing, but in summary, I'll go through those. Issue number 1, the lawsuit that was filed. And so I'm going to be careful how I respond because we're still in an open solicitation and we're still in the midst of an open lawsuit. But to answer the question of what is MAA's plan for maintaining service between the expiration of Frapport's contract, which is March 31st, until we resolve the solicitation. MAA is evaluating the best option for maintaining oversight of the food and retail program after March 31st's expiration of the contract. We have three options that we're considering. One option is to exercise a provision in the existing contract that allows for month-to-month. The second option is an option to actually extend the Fraport contract for some period of time. And then the third option is to bring in another party to come in and operate the program. That would be an emergency contract. Either one of these options will require Board of Public Works approval, so we'll be working very closely with the board on those options. We see no material impact to services to passengers during this time. The program will always have oversight, and so we see no material impact to passengers. Also, we don't foresee any adverse fiscal impact from the delay. The only impact that we may realize is the opportunity cost. The revenues to the airport with the new contract will likely be different, likely be better. And so there's an opportunity cost there, but we cannot monetize that opportunity cost at this time. With respect to the second item, in terms of our ability to recover and compete and retain our market share, I feel very optimistic about our ability to retain our market share, and I think we're doing quite well despite what I'll refer to as a temporary drop in our market share. Despite a very challenging economic environment, MAA continues to attract new interest to new markets. As I stated earlier, 3 new airlines launched service to BWI in 2022, including Avelo, service to New Haven, Iceland Air service to Reykjavik, Iceland, and Play, also offering service to Reykjavik, Iceland. The idea of attracting new carriers during a pandemic when the economy is so uncertain is quite a feat, and so I applaud the Air Service Development Team in that respect. During 2022, MAA also saw 4 additional airlines restart service that was suspended during the pandemic, including Air Canada, British Airways, Condor, and JetBlue. Ultra-low-cost carrier Frontier has added 6 new routes since the beginning of 2022. And as announced earlier, last week, Copa Airlines announced a new service to Panama, opening up our market up to Latin America. This service will begin in June of 2023. So due to the constraints with the baggage handling system, which is also making it difficult for Southwest to meet its real growth plans, we've embarked on the baggage handling system that I talked to earlier that will provide them additional baggage handling system capacity, as well as all the associated amenities that come with that terminal. The industry experienced several significant events during the last several months, which caused considerable passenger disruptions, traffic disruptions, and it's important to note that these disruptions were attributed to the airline or the FAA, not the airports, generally speaking. So this is true for BWI as well. The Southwest Airlines debacle, as well as the NOTAMs issues with the FAA and several before that, were all issues that MAA had very little control over. At a particular point of the discussion during the Southwest Airlines debacle, it became obvious to us that had we been notified earlier in the process, that we would have been in an even better position to support the passengers. And so I think there's common agreement with the airline that we will do better in terms of communicating and coordinating on efforts like that. In terms of market share, so Reagan National Airport is a slotted airport, and American Airlines has been instructed by the FAA to use those slots or lose them, and so they're using them, right? And so they have more seats in the market than demand, and so there's an artificial growth there, and so that use it or use it slot was reinstated in October 2022. So American Airlines adding more capacity, Southwest Airlines still finding its growth back is really what's contributing to the market share issue. And we think that once Southwest Airlines and Spirit Airlines are able to fully recover from this pandemic, that we'll find our market position as we've always had it in the past. And so I think that's a transitional and temporary market position that's shown in that illustration. We do concur with the governor's allowance as recommended by the analysts, as well as the governor's allowance with PAYGO. That completes my portion of the presentation. Thank you again, Chair.
Thank you very much. Questions? Delegate Edelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. As somebody who has yet to comprehend the concept of packing light, and having spent many a Sunday evening in the baggage area at BWI, can you give us a little bit more context on what the capital improvements to the baggage handling system will be? I will say I've spent many a Sunday evening with many other passengers standing around waiting for their luggage, and that can take some time, and I think that would go a long way to improving the customer experience. Can you give us a little bit more context on what that's going to look like?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And so the Concourse A, B, and baggage handling system project will address two needs for us from a baggage standpoint. One, it will allow more capacity for us to push inbound bags to the aircraft in a much quicker way, in a much more secure way. But we're also adding another carousel that will give us additional capacity to allow Southwest Airlines to manage baggage that are coming in more quickly. There's also some work that's being done behind the wall that allows Southwest Airlines to maneuver better. The experience that you normally have is Southwest will probably guide you to carousel number 1, and you'll wait there for 10, 15, 20 minutes to hear an announcement that you should go to another carousel. Well, that's because of the constraints that they have behind the wall. And so this project will help address that as well.
One other, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. Pivoting a little to the Southwest issue, recognizing that a lot of that was as a result of Southwest system. Can you give us also a little more context on sort of what is the BWI crisis management system for a situation like that? Are there things where we look at it and say, we could have done better on this, we have plans to do this? I understand that part of it was them not communicating with you timely, but give us a little bit more understanding there of what could have and should have been done and what you could hopefully do in the future to expedite some of that challenge for passengers.
Another very good question. So if you're familiar with the airport environment, you understand that that airports are always training and retraining and doing tabletop exercises to deal with crisis management situations in the airport, right? So rarely are we caught off guard with a crisis. However, each crisis is different. In this particular case, we never imagined having so many people stranded in the terminal at one time. And so typically what comes out of a revisit of how we can respond to a crisis management is typically communications and coordination. That's always top 1 or 2. In this case, internally, we could have had better communications between our operations and our customer service unit. They work very closely together. They've already come up with plans to improve that communication. We have one unit that is very operationally minded, and then the other one which is not so operationally minded, so we have to deal with that, those personalities as well. But the real issue comes down to, had we known farther in advance that this issue was developing, we could have done a better job at deploying our people earlier. We had water, we had blankets, we had our customer service agents, our volunteers. We provided support to the airline, to the passengers when we were there, but had we known earlier in advance, we probably could have done some preemptive work to not have the crowd accumulate as large as it did in the terminal building.
Hopefully that was part of the conversation that you had with Southwest CEOs saying, next time you have to let us know a lot earlier on so we can be proactive on this.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about the conversation with Southwest is they're not hiding behind the issue. They accept that it was a catastrophe, that it was an embarrassment, that the passengers were grossly mishandled. They accept that, they own it. We'll see how well they respond to it. But right now, if you look at the passengers' response, the planes are still full and people are flying, and it looks like they're doing what they need to do to satisfy USDOT.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you. And I apologize if any of the questions that I have you hit on because I stepped out for a second. So my question is actually tied to something that was in Office of Legislative Audit's report from 2019. I just wanted to check if any progress was made on a couple of these things. So one of the things I know they found out then was that there were some bid openings in the past for procurement opportunities that wasn't listed on eMaryland Marketplace. I just wanted to see if you could speak to, other than obviously the big concessions contract, just other things that you all may be doing. Is that published on eMaryland Marketplace? Has all that been rectified since 2019 when we had the last?
Yeah, as a matter of rule, all of our procurements are published on eMarket, on eMaryland Marketplace. What came out in that audit report was an anomaly. And so we didn't have to overcorrect. We just had to make sure that our system was foolproof and that we didn't have those anomalies occur again. Yes, all of our procurements are published on eMaryland Marketplace as required.
Thank you. And the second question was on not necessarily your MBE goals, but your MBE attainment toward those goals. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
I'm sorry, can you clarify that question?
Your MBE attainment towards those goals. So, of course, statewide, we have a goal of 30%. I'm just wondering, within MAA, where are we within those broader goals?
Okay. So we typically do about 25% per year. We have several goals that we are subject to. We have the federal DBE goal and the federal ACDBE goal. You're referring to the state's MBE goal.
Correct.
We
As
think
a state
we do
legislator.
the state. That's right. And we think we do quite well. We have a very strong focus on minority business development at the Maryland Aviation Administration. As a matter of fact, throughout the Department of Transportation, there's a strong focus on MBE participation. The challenge that we have, that all agencies will have, is not all contracts lend themselves to minority business participation equally. But we always try to do the best we can to, I'm going to use a word that I'm not supposed to use, maximize MBE participation on contracts. And so I'm proud of what we do there. I think the agency is proud of what we do. We can always do better, and we will do better. Paul has talked to us about doing better in that respect, and hopefully the next time we have this meeting, we'll be able to talk about some of the improvements that we've made.
If I may, Chairman, just that is a very high priority for me. We've already talked about ways to think about how we put contracts out, meaning the scale of contracts, potentially breaking contracts up, looking at the geography of how we do contracts, for instance, and communicating to different parts of the the business community that does work with the entire department, particularly the A&E world, for instance, is a good example, where it is not a compliance issue, it is an attainment issue that we are going to surpass, and that is going to be our focus.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. As the fourth most diverse state in the union, the most diverse east of Mississippi, obviously, if we can do it anywhere, doing it in Maryland will be a model for the country.
Great. A couple of questions from me. First, a comment, or an isn't that so question. When you were describing the concession extension, Director Smith, you talked about the passengers. That's really important. I just hope we'll also look out for the workers who are a part of the concession. Isn't that so?
Absolutely. We spend a lot of time working with unions. We have more than one union on the program, and I often feel comfortable that we can have that conversation, feeling comfortable that we care as much, if not more, about those employees as the unions do, right? And so we're always looking for ways, to the extent that we can, to make sure that the workers in our concessions program, or any employee in the airport, that they have a beneficial experience while they're working at the airport.
Right, but just to clarify something, unions are made up of?
So there are two unions representing...
Sorry, who are the members of the unions?
Airport employees in this case.
Okay,
Yes,
so
correct.
workers. Okay, thanks. Thank you. In the back of the analysis, there's an update. I know we didn't cover it when the analyst was speaking out loud, but you've probably seen it about the airport noise zone update. And we discussed this a little bit in a bill hearing yesterday. It's not due till March 30th, so I don't expect you to whip it out and hand it to me right now. But can you just provide an update on the updated information you were going to send over to the committee chairs?
Yeah, so when the JCR first came out, we gave, we thought it was a pretty hefty response to that. There was a need for additional information, and so we received the letter from the legislature on January the 11th, asking us to provide some clarifying information on a number of issues. And so we're looking into those. I think we're pretty close. We'll certainly have the response before the March 30th due date. But there are questions around, clarification on the timing of the runway, a new runway or an expanded runway. We're going to, 1028, we'll respond to that, and some clarification on how do we validate our noise data and that kind of stuff. But we're prepared to respond to that in writing.
Great, looking forward to it. And then just two issues I'm hoping you can just further educate the committee on, the subcommittee on, excuse me. One is the Chimes program and how that's going. And then also, we hear a lot about the passenger side, but how are things going on the freight side?
So with respect to Chimes, I always refer to them as the crown jewel of our airport. When we went through the pandemic, there was not a more reliable workforce in our airport than the Chimes employees, and they were working under precarious conditions. We just completed a new contract with Chimes. Every time we go into a contract negotiation with Chimes, we, MAA, we're looking for ways to improve their working conditions and their pays and their benefit. And we were able to achieve that in the new contract as well. And so we value them as a member of our BWI Marshall family, and we look for every opportunity to improve their work conditions because they just do amazing work for us.
Great. And how about just, we'll update on the freight side just to further educate us. The freight?
Freight. So another shining star that came out of the pandemic was the growth of Amazon. Amazon has almost 2,000 employees there. These are employees who are working, who have jobs that otherwise wouldn't have those jobs. And now it's been very publicly noted that Amazon went through a period of trying to make sure that those employees had the best working conditions. That's not something that we're involved with, but they continue to grow, and they intend to provide good jobs to a workforce that otherwise wouldn't be working at the airport.
Great. Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Was that a no or a yes? You guys are moving. You guys are lifting your arms a lot. Okay. I think we have no further questions. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And I think with that, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Do you have a question? Okay. Thank you all.